Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dusty, sunlit world of ancient Egyptian scribes, where the air hums with the scratch of reed pens and the faint rustle of papyrus. Picture yourself standing on a packed earth floor surrounded by shelves stacked with scrolls, each one holding secrets of pharaohs, gods, or grain tallies. The Nile's breeze sneaks through a high window, carrying the scent of mud and lotus flowers. Your inner scriptorium, the beating heart of Egypt's bureaucracy. And let's be honest, you probably won't survive a day here without smudging ink or angering a cranky overseer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I love picturing where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in Thebes around 1500 BCE, in a low mud brick building tucked behind a temple's towering columns. The scriptorium is alive with quiet chaos. Scribes, all men in crisp linen kilts, hunch over wooden tables, their fingers stained black from ink made of soot and river water. You squint at the sunlight slanting through reed mats overhead, catching dust motes that dance like tiny gods. The room smells faintly of dried fish and the sharp tang of wet papyrus. You're not just a visitor here, you're trying to blend in, maybe even pass as a scribe's apprentice. Good luck. Those hieroglyphs on the wall look like a code you'll never crack. Let's set the scene properly. A scriptorium isn't some grand library like you might imagine. It's more like a busy workshop where Egypt's records are born. Scribes here aren't just nerds with pens. They're the backbone of the kingdom, tracking everything from tax receipts to sacred rituals. Mainstream history tells us these guys were among the few who could read and write, making them indispensable to pharaohs and priests. Without them, Egypt's economy would have collapsed faster than a poorly built pyramid. You notice one scribe muttering to himself, double-checking a grain shipment tally. He's not writing a novel, he's making sure the city eats tomorrow. But here's a quirky tidbit. Not every scribe was a stuffy bureaucrat. Some were known to doodle in the margins of their scrolls, little sketches of cats chasing birds or even cheeky caricatures of their bosses. Archaeologists have found these on scraps of papyrus, proof that even 3,000 years ago, people got bored at work. You spot one such doodle on a discarded sheet, a wonky ibis with an exaggerated beak. It's no masterpiece, but it makes you grin. Imagine getting caught by the head scribe for that. Probably a stern lecture and extra hours copying temple hymns. You wander closer to a table, careful not to bump a stack of scrolls. The scribes barely glance up. They're too focused, their reed pens scratching in rhythmic whispers. You're handed a blank papyrus sheet, and it feels surprisingly heavy, like a stiff placemat. The surface is smooth but slightly gritty, made from the pith of Nile reeds pressed into thin layers. You're told to sit, observe, and maybe try copying a simple glyph. The head scribe, a wiry man with a shaved head and a permanent frown, points to a symbol, a reed leaf, meaning life. You dip your pen in ink and, oops, it blobs. The scribe sighs like you've insulted his ancestors. Told you surviving here wouldn't be easy. Historians still argue whether scriptoria were more like schools or offices. Some say they were training grounds for young boys learning to write. Others insist they were purely administrative hubs, churning out records like an ancient DMV. You see both sides here. A corner where a teenager practices glyphs on broken pottery shards, cheaper than papyrus, and another where older scribes haggle over a tax document. The room's energy is intense but oddly soothing, like white noise for your brain. You're starting to get why people worked here for decades. There's a rhythm to it, a kind of meditative focus. Speaking of focus, Let's talk about the Scribes vibe. These guys aren't your average labourers sweating in the fields. They're educated, respected, and just a little smug about it. You catch one adjusting his kilt like he's on a catwalk, probably flexing his status. It's funny. Egyptians loved their bureaucracy so much, they even had gods for writing, like Thoth, the ibis-headed deity who supposedly invented hieroglyphs. You half expect to see his statue in the corner, but instead there's just a clay pot of extra reeds. Practicality wins over divine flair here. You're starting to feel the scriptorium's pulse now. The soft clink of ink pots, the rustle of papyrus, the occasional cough from a scribe with too much dust in his lungs. It's all weirdly calming. You're tempted to try another glyph, but the head scribe is watching, and you don't want to push your luck. You're still in Thebes, but now you're leaving the scriptorium's dusty hum behind, trudging toward the Nile's edge where the papyrus plant thrives. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth and green reeds, their feathery tops swaying like a crowd at a lazy festival. You're here to see where it all begins. Not the grand temples or pharaoh's tombs, but the humble marsh where papyrus, the backbone of Egypt's writing, grows wild. The sun beats down, and your sandals sink slightly into the muddy bank. You're not exactly dressed for this. Your linen kilt is pristine, and the locals are already smirking at your city slicker vibe. Surviving this marsh might be tougher than dodging the head scribe's glare. Picture the scene. The Nile stretches wide, its surface glinting like polished bronze under the midday sun. Papyrus plants tower around you, some reaching 10 feet tall, their umbrella-like heads bobbing in the breeze. These aren't just weeds. They're the raw material of Egypt's bureaucracy. Its art, its history. Mainstream history confirms that papyrus was a cornerstone of ancient record-keeping, used for everything from tax ledgers to love poems. By 3000 BCE, Egyptians had mastered turning these reedy giants into durable sheets, exporting them across the Mediterranean. You're standing in the birthplace of that industry, and it's messier than you expected. You wade closer, the water lapping at your ankles, cool but slightly slimy. A farmer nearby, his hands calloused and stained green, shows you the plant's core, the pith, a spongy white triangle inside the stalk. This is what becomes a scroll, but it's hard to imagine now, surrounded by buzzing dragonflies and the occasional croak of a frog. Here's a quirky tidbit. Papyrus wasn't just for writing. Egyptians chewed the roots like ancient bubblegum, claiming it freshened breath. You're offered a piece, and it tastes like soggy celery with a hint of dirt. Not exactly a delicacy, but you nod politely to avoid offending the farmer. The process starts here, in this marshy chaos. You watch as workers, knee-deep in water, select the tallest, healthiest stalks. They don't just yank them out. There's a rhythm to it, a careful twist to avoid bruising the pith. You try to mimic them, grabbing a stalk, but it slips from your grip, splashing you with mud. The workers chuckle. Apparently, you're not the first outsider to underestimate papyrus. They explain that only the lower third of the stalk is prime for scrolls. The rest might end up as boat material or kindling. It's a reminder that nothing in Egypt goes to waste, not even a weed. Historians still argue whether papyrus harvesting was a specialized trade or just grunt work. Some say only skilled artisans handled the plants, trained to spot perfect stalks. Others think it was left to low-status laborers who waded through crocodile-infested waters. You glance nervously at the ripples in the Nile. Crocodiles are real here, and you're not keen on testing their mood. The farmer assures you they're mostly upstream, but his grin suggests he enjoys your unease. You decide to stay closer to the bank, just in case. Let's talk about the vibe of this place. The marsh is alive, but it's not chaotic like the scriptorium. there's a slow, almost hypnotic pace. Slice, twist, stack, repeat. The workers hum a low chant, maybe to keep rhythm or scare off snakes. It's soothing, like a lullaby you didn't know you needed. You notice a kid, barely 10, hauling a bundle of reeds twice his size. He's learning early, probably dreaming of a scribe's life in the city. You wonder if he'll make it, or spend his days stuck in this mud. Speaking of mud, your sandals are now caked, and you're starting to feel like a walking swamp creature. The workers don't seem to mind. They're used to it, their feet tough as leather. You try to focus on the papyrus, imagining it as a scroll in the scriptorium you left behind. Remember that smudged hieroglyph you botched? This is where it all starts, in this sticky green world. The farmer hands you another stalk, showing you how to peel the outer rind. You fumble, of course, tearing the pith. He laughs again, softer this time, and says you'll get the hang of it. You're not so sure. The sun's climbing higher, and the marsh is getting steamier. You're tempted to sit under a palm tree, but there's no time for slacking. The workers are stacking reeds into neat piles, ready for the next step, turning this soggy mess into something that can hold a pharaoh's words. You're starting to respect the papyrus plant, not just for its utility, but for its stubborn survival in this muddy chaos. You're knee-deep in the Nile's muddy embrace now, surrounded by towering papyrus reeds, their feathery heads swaying like they're gossiping about your clumsy attempts to fit in. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. You've left the scriptorium's orderly chaos behind and seen the marsh where papyrus is born. Now you're joining the workers who harvest these reeds for eternity. Your sandals are soaked, your kilt splattered with mud, and the locals are still chuckling at your city-dweller awkwardness. Surviving this harvest might be trickier than dodging a crocodile's snap, or at least you hope it is, because the Nile's ripples are looking suspiciously lively today. Picture yourself standing in a shallow channel, the water cool against your shins. The papyrus stalks loom around you, green and stubborn, their roots gripping the riverbed like they've got a personal grudge against being uprooted. Mainstream history tells us that harvesting papyrus was a vital industry in ancient Egypt, feeding the scriptoria that kept the kingdom running. By 2500 BCE, the process was so refined that Egypt exported papyrus as far as Greece and Mesopotamia, a kind of ancient paper monopoly. You're here to see how it's done, and it's less glamorous than you imagined. Think less noble craft and more sweaty slog in the mud. You're handed a short curved blade by a wiry harvester named Katie, his hands scarred from years of slicing stalks. He shows you how to cut, a quick diagonal slash near the base just above the root, to free the pith without mangling it. You try, and your blade slips, nearly taking off your thumb. Katie snorts, muttering something about soft-handed scribes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some harvesters believed the Nile's spirits blessed certain stalks, so they'd whisper prayers before cutting, hoping for extra durability. You're not sure if Katie's praying or just cursing your incompetence, but you give it a shot, muttering a half-hearted, "Please don't snap" to the next reed. It doesn't break, so maybe the spirits are listening. The rhythm of harvesting is relentless but oddly soothing. Slice, twist, pull, stack, over and over until your arms ache and your back protests. You notice the workers move like dancers, their blades flashing in the sun, each cut precise. They stack the stalks in neat bundles, tying them with strips of dried papyrus rind. You try to help, but your knot unravels, and a bundle tumbles into the water. Ketty retrieves it with a sigh, and you're pretty sure he's mentally demoting you to useless apprentice. At least the frogs hopping around your feet seem unbothered. They're probably used to bumbling newcomers. Historians still argue whether harvesting was a skilled trade or just back-breaking labour. Some say only trained workers could select the best stalks, judging their thickness and pith quality by feel. Others insist it was grunt work, left to whoever could stomach the mud and bugs. You see both sides. Ketty's hands move with practiced ease, but there's a kid nearby, barely 12, hacking away with more enthusiasm than skill. He's probably earning his keep for a family back in the village. You wonder if he dreams of escaping to a scriptorium, like the one you saw. Remember that ink-blobbing disaster with the reed leaf glyph? The sun's climbing higher, turning the marsh into a steamy haze. Your skin prickles with sweat, and a dragonfly the size of your hand buzzes past, making you flinch. The workers don't even blink. They're too busy chatting about the next festival, or complaining about a stingy overseer. It's funny. Despite the hard work, there's a camaraderie here, a shared rhythm that feels almost meditative. You try another cut, and this time the stalk comes free cleanly. Ketty nods, a rare flicker of approval. Maybe you're not hopeless after all. Speaking of not hopeless, let's talk about the stakes. These reeds aren't just plants. They're the lifeline of Egypt's records. One bad harvest could mean fewer scrolls, which means angry scribes and a grumpy pharaoh. You imagine the head scribe from the scriptorium chewing someone out for a short supply. The workers know this, but they don't let it stress them. They toss around jokes like how the Nile's fish probably write better hieroglyphs than you do. You laugh, mostly to hide your embarrassment, and keep slicing, hoping to redeem yourself. As the pile of stalks grows, you notice the care taken to keep them clean. No mud, no torn rinds. These will be carried to the artisans next, the ones who'll turn this green mess into the smooth sheets you saw in the scriptorium. You're starting to get it. Every careful cut here is a step toward immortality, a way to make words last thousands of years. You wipe sweat from your brow, glance at the Nile, still no crocodiles, thank Thoth, and feel the marsh's pulse, steady and ancient, pulling you deeper into its world. You've left the Nile's muddy marshes behind, your sandals still squelching from the reed's damp embrace. Now you're in a shaded workshop just outside Thebes, where the air smells of wet papyrus and drying linen. The sun filters through a canopy of palm fronds, casting dappled light on artisans who transform those raw stalks you hacked at into smooth, creamy scrolls. Your kilt's still a muddy mess from the harvest. Good luck explaining that to the head scribe if you ever get back to the scriptorium. For now, you're here to learn how Egypt turns a swamp plant into the world's first paper, and it's a process so finicky you're already betting you'll botch it. Picture the scene. A low, open-sided structure with mud brick walls buzzing with quiet focus. Artisans sit cross-legged on reed mats, their hands moving with the precision of dancers. Stacks of freshly cut papyrus stalks, still glistening from the Nile, are piled in one corner. The floor is littered with green scraps, like a salad gone wrong. Mainstream history confirms that by 3000 BCE, Egyptians had perfected a method to create papyrus sheets, layering strips of pith to form durable, flexible scrolls. These weren't just for scribes. They were Egypt's pride, shipped to far-off lands like Crete and Byblos. You're about to see how it's done, and it's less magical than you hoped, more like cooking with a side of elbow grease. An artisan named Mary, her fingers nimble and stained with plant sap, beckons you over. She's slicing a stalk lengthwise with a bronze knife, peeling away the tough green rind to reveal the white, spongy pith inside. You try it, and your knife slips, tearing the pith into a soggy mess. Mary laughs, a soft sound like wind through reeds, and says, "You're better suited to carrying water." Here's a quirky tidbit. Some artisans believed the pith's texture could predict a scroll's quality. Too soft, and it'd crumble. Too hard, and it'd crack. Mary presses a strip between her fingers, nodding like she's reading its future. You try again, and this time you get a clean strip. She gives you a grudging nod, but you're not winning any artisan awards yet. The process is hypnotic but brutal. You watch Mary lay thin strips of pith in 2 layers, one horizontal, one vertical, on a flat stone slab. She overlaps them slightly, like weaving a basket, then covers the pile with a linen cloth and pounds it with a wooden mallet. You give it a go, and your first swing misses, nearly smashing your thumb. The other artisans chuckle, muttering about clumsy apprentices. The pounding fuses the strips, their natural starches acting like glue. Then the sheets are pressed under heavy stones for days to flatten them. You realize why scrolls are so precious. Each one takes hours of sweat and skill. Historians still argue whether papyrus making was an art or a trade. Some say it required years of training, like a sculptor shaping stone. Others claim it was repetitive grunt work, open to anyone with steady hands. You see both sides. Mary's precision is almost poetic, but there's a kid nearby, maybe 14, pounding sheets with the bored focus of someone who's done this forever. He's probably dreaming of a scribe's cushy life, like the one you glimpsed in the scriptorium. Remember that ink-blobbing fiasco with the reed leaf glyph? These sheets are what made that moment possible, and you're starting to respect the chain of labor behind every scroll. The workshop's rhythm is soothing, like a heartbeat. Mallets thump, knives scrape, and artisans hum softly, maybe to keep time or ward off boredom. You notice a woman soaking finished sheets in water to soften them, her hands moving like she's petting a cat. It's funny. Egyptians were so obsessed with perfection that some workshops rejected sheets with even a single flaw. You spot a discarded sheet with a tiny tear and wonder if it'll end up as kindling or a kid's doodle pad. You're tempted to sneak it away, but Mary's watching, and her stare says she's not above rapping your knuckles. Speaking of knuckles, yours are aching from peeling pith. You're not cut out for this, and the artisans know it. One jokes that your strips look like they were chewed by a hippo. You laugh, mostly to hide your embarrassment, and keep working, laying out strips under Mary's guidance. The air grows stickier as the day heats up, and sweat trickles down your back. You're starting to feel the weight of this craft, not just the physical labor, but the knowledge that these sheets will carry Pharaoh's decrees, priests' prayers, or maybe just a merchant's grocery list into eternity. As you stack a finished sheet, lumpy but passable, you glance at the pile ready for the scriptorium. You can almost see the scribes there, unrolling these sheets, dipping their pens, and cursing your uneven work. The connection between this sweaty workshop and the scriptorium's quiet intensity is clear now. You wipe your brow, dodge a stray fly, and realize you're one step. You're still in the Thebes workshop, the air thick with the scent of wet papyrus and the faint tang of drying linen. The artisan's rhythmic pounding of mallets echoes like a distant drum, and you're trying to keep up, your hands clumsy from peeling pith in the last section. Those smooth sheets you helped make, well, helped is generous, are now stacked, ready for the scribe's pens. But before you can daydream about rejoining the scriptorium's inky chaos, you are handed a new task: mastering the tools of the trade. You're about to handle a scribe's reed pen and ink, and let's be honest, given your track record with knives and reeds, you're probably going to make a mess that'd make Mary the artisan roll her eyes. Picture yourself at a low wooden table, the surface worn smooth by years of scribes' elbows. A clay pot of black ink sits in front of you, its surface shimmering like a tiny, ominous lake. Next to it is a reed pen, cut from the same papyrus stalks you saw in the marsh. Remember that muddy fiasco with Katie? The pen's tip is sharpened to a fine point, and there's a small palette with a red ink cake for special markings. Mainstream history tells us that Egyptian scribes used these simple tools to create everything from tax records to sacred texts, their precision unmatched for centuries. By 2000 BCE, their writing system, hieroglyphs, hieratic and later demotic, was the backbone of Egypt's bureaucracy. You're holding the tools that made that possible, and they feel deceptively fragile. An older scribe named Ptahhotep, his fingers stained black as coal, hands you a reed pen and gestures to a scrap of papyrus. He's got the vibe of a teacher who's seen too many apprentices fail, and his raised eyebrow says you're next. You dip the pen into the ink, made from soot, water, and a touch of gum for stickiness. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes mix their ink with odd ingredients, like crushed beetle shells, to make it glossier. You sniff the pot, half expecting a bug-related whiff, but it just smells faintly of charcoal. You try to write a simple line, and, yep, ink splatters like a toddler's art project. Ptahhotep sighs, muttering about hopeless beginners, and you can't help but laugh at your own incompetence. The pen's trickier than it looks. You have to hold it at just the right angle, applying steady pressure to avoid tearing the papyrus or flooding it with ink. Ptahhotep shows you how to draw a basic hieroglyph, a water ripple symbolizing "en you try," and it looks more like a squashed snake. He corrects your grip, his calloused hand guiding yours, and you manage a wobbly but passable glyph. It's oddly satisfying, like solving a puzzle, and you start to see why scribes spent years perfecting this. The room's quiet hum, pens scratching, ink pots clinking, feels like a lullaby, pulling you into its rhythm. Historians still argue whether scribes made their own tools or relied on specialized craftsmen. Some say every scribe cut their own reed pens, tailoring them to their writing style. Others think workshops churned out standardized pens like an ancient assembly line. You see both possibilities here. Ptahhotep trims his own pen with a small knife, but a younger scribe nearby grabs a pre-cut one from a basket. You're tempted to cheat and grab one too, but Ptahhotep's watching, and you don't want another lecture. Besides, there's something meditative about trimming the reed, even if your cuts are as uneven as your mud-soaked sandals from the marsh. Speaking of sandals, they're still caked with Nile mud, and you're starting to feel like a walking swamp exhibit. The other scribes don't seem to notice. They're too busy scratching away, some copying temple inventories, others practicing glyphs on pottery shards to save papyrus. It's funny. Egyptians were so practical, they'd recycle broken pots as notepads, like the ancient version of scribbling on a napkin. You spot a shard with a half-finished bird glyph and wonder if its owner got distracted or just gave up. You're not one to judge, considering your own ink-splattered disaster. The workshop's vibe is calmer than the marsh or papyrus-making station, but it's not exactly relaxing. Scribes lean forward, eyes narrowed, as if the papyrus might betray them. You try another glyph, a reed leaf like the one you botched in the scriptorium way back in section 1. This time, it's slightly better, though Ptahhotep still grunts disapprovingly. You joke that maybe you're destined to be the scribe who invents abstract art, and he almost smiles. Almost. The other scribes chuckle, and one quips that your glyphs look like they were drawn by a drunk baboon. You laugh, grateful for the banter, and keep practicing, the pen's scratch blending with the room's soft hum. As you work, you realize these tools, pen, ink, papyrus, are more than just objects. They're the bridge between a scribe's mind and eternity, turning fleeting thoughts into records that'll outlast everyone here. You're still hunched over a table in the Thebes workshop, the air thick with the scent of ink and dried papyrus, your fingers smudged from your latest attempt at a reed leaf glyph. Better than your squashed snake disaster, but still not winning any scribe awards. The soft scratch of pens surrounds you, a rhythm as steady as the Nile's flow, and Ptahhotep, the grumpy scribe from the last section, is watching you like a hawk god sizing up its prey. You're moving on from tools now, diving into the heart of a scribe's craft, learning hieroglyphs' secrets. You're about to practice carving sacred symbols, and given your track record, remember that ink-splattered mess in the scriptorium, you're probably going to butcher a few before you get it right. Picture yourself seated on a reed mat, a fresh papyrus sheet in front of you, its surface smooth but unforgiving. A clay tablet nearby holds examples of hieroglyphs: a falcon for Horus, a lotus for rebirth, a coiled snake for eternity. These aren't just pretty pictures. They're Egypt's sacred writing system, a code that binds gods, pharaohs, and mortals. Mainstream history tells us hieroglyphs, used by 3100 BCE, were more than text. They were art, magic, and power, carved on tombs or scribbled on tax receipts. You're here to learn their secrets, but the symbols look like a puzzle designed to make you feel like an illiterate tourist. Ptahhotep hands you a practice shard, a broken pottery piece, cheaper than papyrus, and points to a hieroglyph, an eye symbolizing to see or to make. He shows you how to hold the reed pen, dipping it in black ink with a flick of his wrist. You try, and your eye glyph looks more like a lopsided egg. Ptahhotep mutters something about clumsy foreigners, and you can't help but grin. His grumpiness is growing on you. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes believed certain hieroglyphs, like the Ankh for life, carried protective magic if drawn perfectly. You're tempted to whisper a quick prayer to Thoth, the ibis-headed writing god, but your shaky hand suggests he's not listening today. The process is slow, deliberate, almost meditative. You trace the eye glyph again, copying Ptahhotep's steady strokes. Each symbol has rules, proportions, angles, even the order of lines that you're expected to memorize. You learn that hieroglyphs can be read left to right or right to left, depending on which way the symbols face. It's confusing, like trying to read a book in a mirror, and you jokingly ask Ptahhotep if scribes ever got headaches from this. He doesn't laugh, but a younger scribe nearby snickers, saying, "Only the bad ones." You're pretty sure that's aimed at you, but you take it in stride and keep scratching at the shard. Historians still argue whether hieroglyphs were purely functional or deeply spiritual. Some say they were just a fancy alphabet for record keeping. Others insist every symbol was a ritual act, tying the scribe to the gods. You see both sides. Ptahhotep treats each glyph like a prayer, his lips moving silently, but the guy next to you is rushing through a grain tally like it's a grocery list. You're practicing on pottery to save papyrus. Remember those smooth sheets you helped make with Mary? But the real test will be writing on a scroll. You dread the moment Ptahhotep hands you one. A single smudge could mean starting over, and you've already got a reputation for ink disasters. The workshop's hum is soothing, despite your struggles. Scribes murmur to each other, some reciting glyphs to memorize them, others debating how to draw a tricky owl symbol. It's funny. Egyptians loved their birds, with falcons, ibises, and vultures popping up in half the hieroglyphs. You try the owl, and it looks like a surprised chicken. A nearby scribe jokes that your version might summon a poultry god instead of wisdom. You laugh, wiping sweat from your brow, and wonder if you'll ever get the hang of this. The air's getting warmer, and your mud-caked sandals, yep, still a mess from the marsh, are starting to itch. Speaking of itches, your fingers are cramping from gripping the pen. Ptahhotep shows you another glyph, a reed bundle, meaning truth. You manage a decent one, and he grunts, which you take as high praise. The rhythm of drawing, dip, stroke, pause, is starting to feel natural, like a dance you're slowly learning. You notice a kid across the room, maybe 10, copying glyphs with a focus that puts you to shame. He's probably been at this since he could walk, dreaming of a scribe's life like the one you saw in the scriptorium. You're starting to respect the grind. Not just the skill, but the patience it takes to make squiggles into immortality. As you finish another wobbly eye glyph, you realize hieroglyphs aren't just writing. They're a bridge to Egypt's soul. Every line you draw could end up in a tomb, a temple, or a pharaoh's decree. You're nowhere near good enough to write for eternity, but the thought is humbling. Ptah-hotep watches your latest. You're still in the Thebes workshop, the air heavy with the scent of ink and papyrus dust, your fingers smudged from wrestling with hieroglyphs in the last section. That wobbly eye glyph you drew, more egg than masterpiece, is still fresh in your mind, and Ptah-hotep's grudging nod feels like a small victory. Now you're stepping out of the practice room and into the daily grind of a scribe's life, following one from dawn to dusk. Your sandals, still caked with Nile mud from the marsh, remember that soggy adventure, are starting to feel like a permanent accessory. Surviving a scribe's routine might be tougher than dodging Mary's eye rolls or Ketty's smirks, but the steady rhythm of this world is pulling you in. Picture yourself waking before sunrise in a mud brick house, the air cool and sharp with the scent of baked bread. You're shadowing a scribe named Senefer, a lanky man with a perpetually tired squint, as he starts his day. Mainstream history tells us scribes were the gears of Egypt's bureaucracy, working long hours to record taxes, laws, and temple offerings. By 1500 BCE, their role was so vital that a single missed tally could snarl the kingdom's economy. You're about to live Senefer's routine, and it's less glamorous than you hoped. Think less noble scholar and more overworked accountant with a reed pen. You follow Senefer as he rolls out of bed, splashing his face with water from a clay jug. He mutters about a late-night job copying a priest's hymn, and you're already wondering how he survives on so little sleep. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scribes often chewed fennel seeds to stay alert, believing they sharpen the mind. Senefer offers you some, and they taste like licorice with a hint of grit. You chew politely, but your modern palate's not impressed. Maybe coffee hasn't been invented yet, but you're craving it. He grabs his scribal kit, reed pens, ink pots, and a roll of papyrus, and heads out, his kilt swaying as the sky turns pink. The day's work starts at the scriptorium you visited way back in Section 1. Remember that ink-blobbing disaster with the reed leaf glyph? Senefer's desk is a chaos of scrolls and pottery shards, his personal workspace in the bustling room. He's tasked with recording a grain shipment for the Temple of Amun, and you watch him dip his pen, his strokes quick but precise. You try to keep up, tallying numbers on a shard, but your math's as shaky as your hieroglyphs. Senefer glances at your work and sighs, muttering about apprentices who can't count. You joke that you're better at drawing squashed snakes, and he almost cracks a smile. Progress. Historians still argue whether scribes' lives were cushy or grueling. Some say their literacy and status made them elite, with perks like tax exemptions. Others point out the endless hours and eye strain, arguing it was a grind disguised as prestige. You see both sides. Senefer's respected, with a cushy seat compared to marsh workers. But his fingers are cramped, and his eyes are red from squinting at papyrus all day. You try writing a line of hieratic, a faster cursive script for everyday use, and it looks like a toddler's scribble. Senefer corrects you, his patience thinning, and you realize this job demands a monk-like focus. The day drags on, and you follow Senefer to a temple meeting, where he records offerings, baskets of barley, jars of honey, even a live goose that nearly flaps into your face. It's funny, Egyptians tracked everything, down to the last sesame seed, like ancient spreadsheet nerds. You scribble a note, nearly spilling ink on a priest's robe, and Senefer shoots you a look that says you're one mistake away from cleaning the goose pen. The temple's cool stone walls and incense-heavy air are calming though, and you start to feel the rhythm of Senefer's life. Write, check, repeat, with breaks for flatbread and warm beer. Speaking of breaks, lunch is a quick affair. Bread, figs, and a chat with other scribes about a festival coming up. One jokes that your hieroglyphs might scare the gods away, and you laugh, admitting you're better at eating than writing. The afternoon brings more work, copying a legal contract for a land dispute. Your eyes ache just watching Senefer, and you wonder how he doesn't go cross-eyed. By dusk, he's still at it, checking his work by lamplight, the scriptorium's hum fading as others head home. You're exhausted just shadowing him, your mud-caked feet begging for rest. As the stars emerge, Senefer wraps up, rolling his papyrus carefully. You realize his day, dawn to dusk, no weekends, is the backbone of Egypt's order. Every glyph he writes, every tally he makes, keeps the kingdom running. You're starting to respect the grind, not just for its skill, but for its quiet endurance. You follow him home, the Nile's breeze cooling your skin, ready to see where this scribal life leads next.
You're trailing Senefer again. Your mud-caked sandals from the marsh, still a mess, leaving faint tracks as you step into the cool, incense-heavy air of a Thebes temple. The relentless grind of his daily routine from the last section, with its endless tallies and hieratic scribbles, is behind you for now. Today, you're diving into the sacred side of a scribe's life, recording offerings in a temple archive. The air hums with chants and the faint clink of offering jars. But don't get too cozy. Your knack for ink disasters, like that squashed snake glyph in the workshop, suggests you'll probably smudge something holy and earn a priest's glare. Picture yourself in the temple of Amun. Its sandstone walls carved with gods and pharaohs, their painted eyes seeming to follow you. Torches flicker, casting shadows that dance like spirits across the floor. You're in the archive, a dim chamber lined with shelves of papyrus scrolls, each one a record of offerings to keep the gods happy. Mainstream history tells us that temples were economic hubs as much as spiritual ones, and by 1500 BCE, scribes like Senefer were crucial for tracking donations, grain, wine, even cattle, to ensure divine favor and earthly order. You're here to help, but one wrong move could mean a scribal sin worse than your botched eye glyph. Senefer hands you a papyrus sheet and a reed pen, pointing to a pile of baskets. Barley, dates, and lotus flowers, offerings from a local noble. Your job is to record them in hieratic, the cursive script you barely survived practicing. You dip your pen, and, yep, ink drips onto your kilt. Senefer sighs, his tired squint deepening, and you mutter a joke about being the god of ink spills. He doesn't laugh, but a nearby priest chuckles, saying your mess might appease Seth, the chaos god. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes slipped tiny prayers into their records, believing the gods read along. You're tempted to scribble, "Please don't smite me," next to the barley count, but Senefer's watching. The work is meticulous. You list each item, 10 baskets of barley, 6 jars of date wine, while Senefer checks your numbers against a clay tablet. The temple's air is thick with myrrh, and a low chant from the inner sanctum makes your eyelids heavy. It's soothing, like a lullaby, but you can't doze off. Messing up a temple record could mean divine bad luck. You notice Senefer's precision, each stroke of his pen deliberate, as if the gods themselves are judging. You try to match him, but your hieratic looks like a drunk vulture's tracks. He corrects you, his voice low but sharp, and you realize this isn't just paperwork, it's a ritual. Historians still argue whether temple scribes saw their work as spiritual or bureaucratic. Some say they were priests in all but name, They're writing an act of worship. Others argue they were just clerks, crunching numbers for the temple's wealth. You see both sides. Senefer mutters a prayer to Thoth before starting, but he also grumbles about a late delivery of figs, like a stressed accountant. You're starting to feel the weight of this place. Every scroll you touch, like the ones you helped make with Mary in the workshop, could end up stored for centuries, a link to the divine. The archive's vibe is quieter than the scriptorium's bustle or the marsh's muddy chaos. Scribes work in near silence, broken only by the rustle of papyrus or a priest's soft footsteps. It's funny. Egyptians were so obsessive about records that they tracked even the smallest offerings, like a single duck or a handful of incense. You spot a scroll listing 3 geese, 1 lame, and wonder who bothered to note the limp. You joke to Senefer that maybe the gods prefer wobbly geese, and he shoots you a look that says you're 1 quip away from scrubbing the archive floor. Speaking of scrubbing, your hands are smudged again, and your kilt's a canvas of ink and mud. Ketty from the marsh would be proud of your mess. You try another line, recording a jar of honey, and manage not to spill. Senefer nods, a rare flicker of approval, and you feel a spark of pride. The temple's rhythm is sinking in. Write, check, pray, repeat. You notice a young scribe nearby, copying a hymn with the focus of someone who believes every word matters. It reminds you of Ptahhotep's lessons in the workshop, where every glyph was a step toward eternity. As the day wears on, the torchlight softens, and the archive feels like a cocoon of quiet purpose. You're starting to understand why scribes like Senefer endure the long hours. Their work here isn't just for priests or pharaohs, it's for the gods, for order, for forever. You finish your list, miraculously smudge-free, and hand it to Senefer. He glances at it, grunts, and moves on. You take a breath, the incense wrapping around you, ready to follow him deeper into the scribe's world. You're still in the temple of Amun, the incense-heavy air clinging to your ink-stained kilt as you step away from the archive's quiet shelves. The rhythmic chant of priests and the soft rustle of papyrus scrolls from your last task linger in your ears. But now you're moving into a different sphere of the scribe's world, their social status. You're about to mingle with Egypt's elite scribe class, and given your track record, think back to that ink-splattered disaster in the scriptorium and your muddy marsh misadventure, you're probably not going to impress anyone. Your sandals are still a crusty mess, and you're hoping no one notices you're more swamp rat than scholar. Picture yourself in a bustling courtyard just outside the temple, where scribes gather under a canopy of date palms, their linen kilts crisp and their shaved heads gleaming in the midday sun. The air smells of roasted barley and the faint tang of Nile water. These aren't the sweaty labourers you met with Kiti in the marsh, or the artisans like Mary pounding papyrus. These are the elite, the literate few who keep Egypt's wheels turning. Mainstream history tells us that by 1500 BCE, scribes were a privileged class, often exempt from taxes and manual labour, their skills placing them just below priests and nobles. You're here to see how they carry themselves, and it's clear they know their worth. You follow Senefer, your tired scribe guide, as he joins a group of his peers. They're chatting about a recent festival, their voices low but confident, like they own the place. You're handed a cup of warm beer, standard Egyptian fare, tasting like yeasty soup, and try to blend in. Senefer introduces you as an apprentice, and the others smirk, probably spotting your ink-smudged hands. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes wore special amulets shaped like Thoth's ibis to flaunt their status, like ancient bling. You notice one scribe, a portly man named Jehuti, sporting a shiny bronze ibis pendant, and you joke to yourself that it's the Egyptian equivalent of a designer watch. You're tempted to ask where he got it, but his haughty glance suggests you'd better not. The scribe's status comes with perks, but it's not all lotus flowers and beer. You listen as they gripe about long hours and demanding priests, their voices laced with a mix of pride and exhaustion. Senefer explains that scribes often advise nobles or even the pharaoh's court, their words shaping laws or treaties. You can't try to imagine yourself in their sandals, but your wobbly hieroglyphs, Remember that squashed snake eye glyph would probably get you laughed out of the palace. Still, you're impressed by their confidence, the way they carry themselves like they're one step away from the gods. Historians still argue whether scribes were truly elite or just glorified clerks. Some say their literacy and access to power made them untouchable. Others point out they were still servants, bowing to priests and officials. You see both sides. Senefer's kilt is finer than a farmer's, and he's invited to feasts you'd never see, but he's still hustling, his eyes red from late-night tallies. You try to join the conversation, asking about a recent decree, but your clumsy question earns a raised eyebrow from Jehuti. You laugh it off, joking that you're better at spilling ink than wisdom, and a younger scribe chuckles, tossing you a fig to munch on. The courtyard's vibe is lively but relaxed, with scribes trading stories about botched scrolls or quirky nobles. It's funny. Despite their status, they're not above gossip, like when one whispers about a priest who misread a hymn and offended Amun. You're starting to feel the scribe's world as a tight-knit club, where literacy is the membership fee. You notice a scribe showing off a new papyrus roll, its edges perfectly smooth. Probably one you didn't help make, given your shaky work with Mary. The group admires it, and you realize these scrolls, born from the Martian workshop, are status symbols too. Speaking of status, your muddy sandals are drawing side eyes, and you're pretty sure Jehuti's judging your entire existence. You try to stand taller, mimicking Senefer's posture, but your aching feet, still sore, from the marsh, betray you. The scribes move on to discussing a royal festival, and you're struck by how connected they are to Egypt's pulse. They're not just writing history, they're shaping it, one glyph at a time. You munch your fig, its sweetness cutting through the beer's bitterness, and feel a flicker of awe. These guys aren't just nerds with pens, they're the keepers of Egypt's memory. As the sun climbs higher, the group disperses, Senefer, leading you back toward the scriptorium. You're starting to get why scribes hold their heads high, even if their hands are ink-stained. Their world, your world for now, is one of quiet power, where every word you write or smudge matters. You take a last sip of beer, the courtyard's hum fading, and follow Senefer, ready to see what else this elite life holds. You're back in the Thebes temple courtyard, the lingering taste of that yeasty beer still on your tongue from mingling with the elite scribes. The date palms overhead cast dappled shadows, and your ink-smudged hands, still a mess from your hieroglyph struggles, mark you as an outsider among these polished professionals. You're moving away from the scribe's lofty status now, diving into a rarer corner of their world, the hidden roles of women scribes. Your muddy sandals from the marsh and your knack for ink disasters, think back to that lopsided egg glyph, aren't doing you any favors, but you're about to uncover stories that even Senefer's clique might not know. Surviving this peek into history might mean keeping your mouth shut and your eyes open. Picture yourself slipping into a quieter corner of the temple, a small room off the main archive where the air smells of dust and old papyrus. The walls are plain, no grand carvings, just stacks of scrolls and a low table where a woman named Merit sits, her reed pen moving with a grace that puts your clumsy strokes to shame. Mainstream history tells us that by 1500 BCE, women scribes were rare but real, often working in temples or noble households, recording accounts, or copying sacred texts. Their contributions were vital, but often overshadowed by men like Senefer or Jehuti. You're here to watch Merit work, and you're already feeling like a kid caught sneaking into the grown-ups' room. Merit's kilt is simple, her hair tied back with a linen band, and she barely glances up as you hover nearby. She's tallying offerings, jars of oil, bundles of flax, for a priestess's ritual. You're handed a pottery shard to practice on, and you try a simple water ripple glyph, hoping to impress. It looks like a squiggly worm, and Merit's raised eyebrow says, "It all." Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women scribes were believed to channel Sechat, the goddess of writing, and their work was seen as a divine gift. You joke to yourself that Sechat must be on vacation when you pick up a pen, but Merit's steady. Hand suggests she's got the goddess on speed dial. You watch her write in hieratic, her strokes fast but precise, turning numbers into neat rows. Women like Merit often worked behind the scenes, their scrolls filed away without fanfare. You try to mimic her, dipping your pen in black ink, but you smudge the shard. Again. Merit doesn't scold, just hands you another shard with a faint smile, like she's used to hopeless apprentices. It's soothing, her quiet focus, and the room's hum, pens scratching, a distant priest's chant, feels like a cocoon. You're starting to see why women like her stuck with this, despite the long odds of recognition. Historians still argue whether women scribes were anomalies or a hidden norm. Some say they were exceptional, trained only in elite households. Others suggest they were more common, their work erased by male-centric records. You see both sides. Merit's skill rivals Sennefer's, but she's tucked away in this side room, not flaunting an ibis pendant like Jehuti in the courtyard. You ask her how she learned, and she says her mother, a priestess, taught her, passing down glyphs like family recipes. You're struck by the thought of generations of women, quietly writing Egypt's history, maybe even some of the scrolls you saw in the archive. The room's vibe is different from the scriptorium's bustle, or the courtyard's swagger. It's calmer, more intimate, like a secret shared in whispers. It's funny, while men like Sennefer tracked grain or decrees, women like Merit often recorded domestic details, like cloth inventories or ritual offerings. You spot a scroll listing 7 linen shawls, 1 frayed, and grin, imagining Merit rolling her eyes at a sloppy weaver. You joke that your glyphs are frayed too, and she chuckles, a rare sound that makes you feel less like a bumbling outsider. Speaking of bumbling, your sandals are still caked with mud from the marsh, Ketty would laugh, and your kilt's a canvas of ink and dust. You try another glyph, a lotus flower, and it's slightly less disastrous. Merit nods, almost approving, and you feel a flicker of pride. Her work, though hidden, is part of the same chain you've seen. The reeds from the marsh, the sheets from Mary's workshop, the pens from Ptahhotep's lessons. Women like Merit kept the system running, even if their names rarely made it onto the scrolls. As the light fades, Merit rolls up her papyrus, her movements deliberate, like she's sealing a spell. You realize her work, quiet, precise, uncelebrated, is as eternal as any pharaoh's decree. The temple's chants grow softer, wrapping you in their rhythm, and you're starting to feel the weight of these hidden stories. You thank Merit, your voice low to match the room's hush, and step out, ready to follow the scribe's world wherever it leads next. You're back in the Thebes scriptorium, the familiar hum of scratching pens, and the faint scent of ink pulling you back from Merit's quiet corner in the temple. Your kilt's a disaster. Ink, mud from the marsh, and now a faint dusting of temple incense. And your hands are still smudged from your lotus glyph attempt, which, let's be honest, wasn't your finest hour. Now you're facing a new challenge, fixing a smudged hieroglyph under pressure. After your track record, remember that squashed snake-eye glyph and the ink-splattered shard. You're probably about to make things worse, but the scribes around you don't have time for your clumsiness. The air's tense, and you're about to learn how scribes handle mistakes when eternity's on the line. Picture yourself at a crowded table in the scriptorium, the same one you stumbled into way back in section 1. The room's alive with the rustle of papyrus and the low mutter of scribes double-checking their work. You're working under Ptahhotep again, his grumpy squint as sharp as ever, and he's just handed you a scroll meant for a temple archive, a record of grain offerings. But there's a problem. A hieroglyph, a falcon for Horus, is smudged. Its wing blurred into an inky mess. Mainstream history tells us that by 1500 BCE, scribes took precision seriously. A mistake on a sacred scroll could anger priests or even the gods. You're tasked with fixing it, and Ptahhotep's stare says you'd better not screw this up. You grab a reed pen and a small knife, your hands shaky from nerves. The trick, Ptahhotep explains, is to scrape away the smudge without tearing the papyrus, those sheets you saw Mary craft with such care. You start and the knife slips, nearly slicing the scroll. Ptahhotep mutters something about hopeless apprentices, and you can't help but grin, joking that your knife skills are better suited to peeling onions. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes believed a smudged glyph could curse the writer, so they'd burn a pinch of incense to appease Thoth before fixing it. You're tempted to try, but the incense pot's across the room, and Ptahhotep's impatience is thicker than the Nile's mud. Scraping the papyrus is delicate work, like performing surgery on a butterfly. You manage to remove the smudge, leaving a faint scar on the sheet. Now you have to redraw the falcon, and your heart's pounding. Redraw it wrong, and you'll ruin a scroll meant for the gods. You dip your pen in black ink, steadying your hand, and trace the falcon's form, copying Ptahhotep's example. It's not perfect, but it's recognizable, and he grunts, which you take as a win. The room's hum, pens scratching, scribes whispering, feels like a heartbeat, calming your nerves as you work. Historians still argue whether mistakes were a big deal or just a nuisance. Some say scribes were paranoid about errors, believing they could disrupt divine order. Others think they were practical, fixing smudges with a shrug and moving on. You see both sides. Ptahhotep's treating this like a crisis, but a younger scribe nearby laughs off his own smudged reed glyph, saying it's just practice for the afterlife. You're starting to get why precision matters. Every scroll, like the ones you saw Merit tally, could end up in a temple or tomb, read by gods or kings. The scriptorium's vibe is tense but focused, like a library during finals week. It's funny. Egyptians were so obsessive about perfection that some scribes kept mistake jars for ruined scraps, recycling them as kindling or practice sheets. You spot one such jar overflowing with papyrus bits, and wonder if your squashed snake glyph from the workshop is in there. You joke to a nearby scribe that your mistakes could fuel a bonfire, and he chuckles, saying you'd need a whole pyramid for yours. The banter eases the pressure, and you focus on finishing the falcon, adding its final beak line with a flourish. Speaking of pressure, your hands are cramped, and your kilt's a canvas of chaos. Mud from Kiti's marsh, ink from Senefer's lessons, and now a fresh smudge from this scroll. You're starting to feel like a walking scribal disaster, but there's something satisfying about fixing your mistake. Ptahhotep inspects your work, nods, barely, and moves on. You exhale, realizing you've just saved a scroll from the mistake. Jar. The rhythm of the scriptorium wraps around you, its steady hum a reminder that every glyph, even a fixed one, is a step toward eternity. As you set the scroll aside, you glance at the other scribes, their heads bent over their own papyrus. You're starting to understand their world, not just the skill, but the stakes. A smudged falcon isn't just a mistake, it's a glitch in Egypt's order, a tiny ripple that could echo through temples or tombs. You wipe your brow, the ink on your fingers smearing, and prepare to follow the scribes deeper into their craft. You're still in the Thebes scriptorium, the air thick with the scent of ink and papyrus dust, your hands still smudged from fixing that falcon hieroglyph. Your first real win since the squashed snake disaster. The hum of pens and Ptahhotep's grumpy oversight linger, but now you're stepping into a weightier task, inscribing spells for a pharaoh's tomb. Your kilt's a mess, mud from the marsh, ink from every botched glyph since Section 1, and you're pretty sure you're not cut out for this sacred gig. One wrong stroke here could mess with a pharaoh's afterlife, and surviving that kind of mistake might be tougher than dodging a priest's wrath. Picture yourself in a dimly lit chamber, deep within the temple, its walls carved with scenes of gods weighing hearts against feathers. The air's cool, heavy with myrrh, and a single oil lamp flickers, casting shadows that make the carvings seem alive. You're working with a senior scribe named Anan, his face lined from years of tomb work as he unrolls a pristine papyrus scroll, probably one you didn't help make, given your shaky history with Mary's workshop. Mainstream history tells us that by 1500 BCE, scribes wrote spells from the Book of the Dead, guiding pharaohs through the afterlife with magical texts. You're here to inscribe one, and the stakes feel higher than any grain tally. Anan hands, You a reed pen and points to a spell, a hymn to Osiris meant to protect the pharaoh from underworld demons. You dip your pen in red ink, reserved for sacred words, and try to copy the hieroglyphs. An ankh for life, a scarab for rebirth. Your first attempt smudges, and Anan's sigh could wake Anubis. You joke that your glyphs might scare demons away by being so bad, and he almost smiles. Almost. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes hid tiny personal marks in tomb spells, like a secret signature, hoping their own souls would hitch a ride to the afterlife. You're tempted to sneak in a squiggly line, but Anan's watching like a hawk god. The work is slow, each glyph a small prayer. You trace the scarab, its curves tricky, and feel the weight of writing for eternity. The papyrus, smooth as silk thanks to Mary's craft, drinks the ink greedily, and you're terrified of tearing it. Anan shows you how to steady your hand, breathing slowly, as if the spell's power flows through you. It's hypnotic, the lamps flicker, and the pen's scratch blending into a rhythm that makes your eyelids heavy. You're starting to see why this job was sacred. Every word you write could guide a pharaoh past jackal-headed guards to the field of reeds. Historians still argue whether tomb spells were truly believed or just ritual tradition. Some say scribes saw them as literal magic, ensuring divine protection. Others think they were symbolic, a way to honor the dead while keeping priests employed. You see both sides. Anan's reverence as he writes suggests he believes, but a younger scribe nearby mutters about endless chanting for dead kings, like it's just another shift. You're reminded of Merit's quiet work in the temple, tallying offerings with the same care. Different stakes, same precision. The chamber's vibe is solemn, almost suffocating, but oddly soothing. It's funny. Egyptians were so obsessed with the afterlife that they wrote spells for every possible snag, from snake bites to cosmic quizzes. You spot a scroll with a spell against the devourer of souls, and grin, imagining a demon reading your smudged ankh and fleeing in confusion. You joke to Anan that your handwriting might be the real underworld threat, and he grunts, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. The banter keeps you grounded as you tackle the next glyph, a reed bundle for truth, praying it doesn't blob. Speaking of blobs, your kilt's now a masterpiece of ink, mud, and incense dust. Ketty from the marsh would be proud of the chaos. You finish the scarab, and it's not terrible. Anan nods, a rare sign you're not a total disaster. The rhythm of writing, dip, stroke, pause, is like a chant, pulling you deeper into the spell's world. You notice a young apprentice nearby, copying a simpler spell on a pottery shard, his focus mirroring the kid you saw in the workshop with Ptah-hotep. It's a chain, from marsh to tomb, and you're a tiny link. As you complete the hymn, rolling, the scroll with care, you realize these words might sit in a tomb for millennia, read by no one but the gods. The thoughts humbling, and the chamber's quiet, broken only by Anan's soft humming, wraps you like a blanket. You're starting to feel the scribe's burden, not just to write, but to carry souls into eternity. You hand the scroll to Anan, your fingers trembling, and step back, ready to follow this sacred craft further. You're stepping out of the temple's shadowy tomb chamber, the weight of Anan's sacred spells still lingering like the myrrh in the air. Your kilt's a disaster, ink, mud from Ketty's marsh, and now a faint sheen of tomb dust. But you're used to it by now. The solemn hush of writing for the afterlife fades as you enter a brighter, noisier space. A scribal school tucked behind the scriptorium. You're here to observe boys memorizing glyphs, the next generation of scribes learning the craft you've been fumbling through. Given your history, think back to that smudged falcon and the squashed snake glyph. You're probably not the role model these kids need, but surviving their chaotic energy might be your toughest test yet. Picture yourself in a sunlit courtyard, mud brick walls lined with reed mats, where a dozen boys, aged 8 to 14, sit cross-legged, clutching pottery shards. The air smells of baked clay and the faint tang of Nile water from a nearby canal. A stern teacher named Imhotep, his kilt as crisp as his voice, drills the boys on hieroglyphs, pointing to a wooden board etched with symbols. A reed leaf, a falcon, a coiled snake. Mainstream history tells us that by 1500 BCE, scribal schools were elite training grounds, reserved for boys from wealthy or connected families, preparing them for roles as Egypt's record keepers. You're here to watch, but Imhotep's already eyeing you like you're a disruptive student. One boy, a skinny kid named Thutmose, is scratching a water ripple glyph on his shard. You lean closer, and yep, he smudges it, just like you did back in the workshop with Ptahhotep. You grin, feeling a kinship, and whisper that you've botched worse. Imhotep snaps at you to be quiet, and you mutter a joke about being sent to the corner with a dunce cap. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some boys carved tiny animals into their practice shards, thinking it brought luck from Thoth. You spot a shard with a lopsided crocodile, and wonder if it's Thutmose's attempt at divine backup. It's charming, but Imhotep's glare says he's not amused. The boy's task is grueling. Memorize hundreds of hieroglyphs, from simple lines to complex birds, while reciting their meanings aloud. You try to follow along, mimicking a reed leaf glyph on a borrowed shard, but your version looks like a bent twig. Imhotep sighs, muttering about hopeless visitors, and you laugh, admitting you're better at making mud pies. Thanks, Ketes. Marsh. The courtyard's noise, boys chanting, pens scratching, is chaotic but oddly soothing, like a classroom buzz that lulls you into focus. You're starting to see why these kids endure it. A scribe's life, like Xenophon's, means status and power. Historians still argue whether scribal schools were rigorous academies or glorified boot camps. Some say they were intellectual hubs, shaping Egypt's brightest minds. Others argue they were harsh, with strict discipline to weed out the weak. You see both sides. Imhotep's lessons are precise, teaching proportions and stroke order, but he's quick to wrap a boy's knuckles for a sloppy glyph. Thutmose winces, rubbing his hand, and you feel for him, remembering Ptahhotep's scolding over your own smudged falcon. You're tempted to sneak him a fennel seed, like Xenophon's wake-up trick, but Imhotep's watching. The school's vibe is intense, but vibrant. It's funny, Egyptians took glyphs so seriously that boys memorized them like spells, believing a perfect ankh could please the gods. You spot a kid practicing a lotus glyph, his tongue sticking out in concentration, and grin, imagining him dreaming of Merit's quiet skill or Annan's tomb spells. You try another glyph, a falcon like the one you fixed, and it's slightly better, though Imhotep's raised eyebrow says you're no prodigy. You joke that your falcon might fly backward, and Thutmose snickers, earning a glare from the teacher. Speaking of teachers, Imhotep's relentless, drilling the boys on hieratic script now, the cursive shorthand you saw Xenophon use. You try it, and your lines look like a drunk ibis's tracks. Thutmose leans over, whispering a tip about lighter strokes, and you're touched by his help. Kids teaching the apprentice feels about right. Your sandals, still caked from the marsh, leave dusty prints, and you're pretty sure Imhotep's judging your entire existence. But there's a rhythm here. Chant, write, repeat, that's sinking into your bones, like the scriptorium's hum or the temple's chants. As the sun climbs, the boys break for a quick meal of bread and figs. You join them, munching and listening to their chatter about becoming scribes like Jehuti, with his fancy ibis pendant. You're starting to get it. These kids are the future, learning to carry Egypt's memory, just as you've seen from Marsh to tomb. You finish your fig, the courtyard's noise fading, and follow Thutmose back to his shard, ready to see where this scribal journey leads next. You're still in the scribal school's sunlit courtyard, the chatter of boys like Thutmose, and the stern drone of Imhotep's lessons fading as you step back into the Thebes scriptorium. Your kilt's a walking record of your misadventures. Mud from Ketes Marsh, ink from Ptahhotep's workshop, and now a dusting of chalk from the school's pottery shards. You're moving on from watching kids memorize glyphs to a new challenge, debating whether to write on papyrus or carve words into stone. After your history of smudged hieroglyphs, remember that lopsided egg and the shaky falcon. You're not sure you're ready for this, but the scribes around you are diving into a heated argument, and you're caught in the middle. Picture yourself back at a crowded scriptorium table, the air thick with papyrus dust and the sharp scent of fresh ink. Scribes huddle around a massive sandstone slab, its surface etched with half-finished hieroglyphs, while rolls of papyrus, smooth as those you saw Merrycraft, lie nearby. Mainstream history tells us that by 1500 BCE, Egyptians used papyrus for everyday records like taxes or letters, but stone was reserved for monuments, tombs, and decrees meant to last forever. You're here to weigh in on which is better, and the scribes are treating it like a philosophical cage match. Your clumsy pen skills aren't winning you any credibility, so you'd better keep your wits sharp. A scribe named Khufu, his fingers, calloused from chiseling, argues for stone, pointing to the slab's falcon glyph, its lines crisp despite years of wear. You try carving a simple reed leaf with a bronze chisel and, yep, the stone chips, leaving a jagged mess. Khufu groans, muttering about amateurs ruining eternity, and you joke that your carving might outlast everyone as a warning to future scribes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes believed stone inscriptions carried more divine power, as if Thoth himself preferred them over papyrus. You're tempted to ask Khufu if he's got a hotline to the ibis god, but his scowl says you'd better not. Papyrus has its champions too. A younger scribe, Neb, unrolls a scroll and boasts about its portability. You can carry a library in a basket, unlike stone. You try writing a water ripple glyph on papyrus, and it's smoother than stone but still tricky. Your ink blobs, echoing your scriptorium disasters. Neb chuckles, saying your glyph looks like a drowned fish, and you laugh, admitting you're better at making messes than masterpieces. The debate's rhythm, argue, write, carve, repeat, is oddly soothing, like the school's chants or the temple's hum, pulling you into the scribe's world. Historians still argue whether papyrus or stone-defined Egyptian writing more. Some say papyrus was the real innovation, enabling fast, widespread record-keeping. Others argue stone's durability made it the true vessel of Egypt's legacy. You see both sides. Khufu's slab feels eternal, but Neb's scroll, light and flexible, carries the same glyphs you saw Merit and Anan write. You're reminded of the tomb spells, papyrus for the dead, stone for the gods. You try carving again, and it's slightly better, though Khufu's raised eyebrow says, you're no mason. You switch to papyrus, and your reed leaf is passable. Neb nods, a small victory. The scriptorium's vibe is lively, almost competitive. It's funny. Egyptians were so obsessed with permanence that they'd argue for hours over materials, like modern nerds debating vinyl versus digital. You spot a scribe sketching a practice glyph on a broken pot, probably recycled from Imhotep's school, and grin, imagining Thutmose's lopsided crocodile ending up here. You joke to Neb that your carvings might make great doorstops, and he laughs, tossing you a reed pen to stick to what you're least bad at. Speaking of bad, your sandals are still caked with marsh mud, and your kilt's a canvas of ink and stone dust. Kiti would approve of the chaos. You try another glyph on papyrus, focusing on the smooth flow you saw in Merit's work. It's not perfect, but it's legible, and Neb's nod feels like a badge. The debate rages on. Stone's eternal, papyrus is practical, but you're starting to get it. Both are Egypt's memory, just in different forms. The scriptorium's hum wraps around you, pens and chisels clinking, as you lean into the argument, ready to see where this scribal life leads next. You're still in the Thebes scriptorium, the air buzzing with the clink of chisels and the scratch of pens from your heated papyrus versus stone debate. Your kilt's a walking disaster. Mud from Keti's marsh, ink from Tahotep's lessons, and now stone dust from your clumsy chisel work. And you're pretty sure Neb's still chuckling at your drowned fish glyph. Now you're shifting gears, tasked with drafting a pharaoh's proclamation, a job that feels way above your pay grade. After your string of scribal fumbles, Think back to that smudged falcon and the lopsided egg glyph. You're not exactly brimming with confidence, but the scriptorium's hum is pulling you deeper into the scribe's world. Picture yourself at a polished wooden table, a pristine papyrus scroll unrolled before you, its surface smooth as silk thanks to Mary's craftsmanship. The room's quieter now, the debate fading as scribes focus on a royal decree from Pharaoh Amenhotep III himself, announcing a new temple to Amun. Mainstream history tells us that by 1400 BCE, scribes were the voice of the pharaoh, turning his commands into written law, etched or inked for eternity. You're working under Senefer again, his tired squint sharper than ever, and he's expecting you to help draft this proclamation. One wrong glyph could spark a diplomatic mess, so no pressure. Senefer hands you a reed pen and a draft on a pottery shard, cheaper than wasting papyrus. The proclamation starts with praise for Amun, followed by the temple's specs, 200 cubits long, adorned with gold. You try writing the opening hieroglyph, an ankh for life, and, yep, your ink blobs, smearing the papyrus. Senefer groans, muttering, about apprentices who'd anger the gods, and you joke that your ankh might bless the pharaoh with eternal spills. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes slipped flattery into decrees, like calling the pharaoh beloved of Ra to score favor. You're tempted to add master of ink to Amenhotep's titles, but Senefer's glare says don't try it. Drafting is slow, each glyph a test of precision. You copy Senefer's hieratic script, its cursive flow smoother than the hieroglyphs. You botched with Ptahhotep. The proclamation's tone is grand, almost poetic, and you feel the weight of speaking for a god-king. The scriptorium's hum, pens scratching, scribes murmuring, is calming, like a fan's soft whir, but your hand shakes as you write Temple of Amun. Senefer corrects your sloppy reed glyph, his patience thinner than the papyrus. You're starting to see why this job was elite. Every word carries the pharaoh's will, like the spells you wrote for the afterlife with Anan. Historians still argue whether scribes had creative freedom or were just royal stenographers. Some say they shaped decrees with clever phrasing, influencing policy. Others insist they followed strict templates, no improvisation allowed. You see both sides. Senefer's draft is rigid, sticking to protocol, but he adds a flourish, describing the temple's golden radiance that feels personal. You try to mimic it, writing eternal glory in hieratic, and it's not terrible. Senefer nods, a rare win. You're reminded of Merritt's quiet precision, crafting temple records with the same care, just less fanfare. The scriptorium's vibe is intense but focused, like a newsroom on deadline. It's funny, Egyptians were so formal that proclamations often included curses for anyone who defied them, like "may their name be erased." You spot a draft with such a curse and grin, imagining it aimed at your ink-spilling self. You joke to a nearby scribe that your glyphs might curse you first, and he laughs, saying you'd need a whole scroll for your mistakes. The banter keeps, you grounded as you tackle the next line, listing the temple's offerings. 50 oxen, 100 jars of wine. Speaking of mistakes, your kilt's a canvas of chaos, marsh mud, workshop ink, and now a fresh smudge from this scroll. You're starting to feel like a scribal hazard, but there's something thrilling about writing for a pharaoh. You finish a line, Amun's house shines forever, and Senefer doesn't scold. Progress. The rhythm of drafting, dip, write, check, feels like a dance tying you to the scribes you've met. Ketty's reads, Mary's sheets, Anan's spells. You're part of Egypt's voice now, however shaky your hand. As you roll the scroll, careful not to smudge your work, you realize this proclamation could be read in quartz or carved on stone, like Khufu's slabs. The weight of that, words, shaping a kingdom, sinks in. The scriptorium's hum wraps around you, steady and soothing, as you hand the scroll to Senefer, ready to follow the scribe's craft wherever it leads next. You're stepping away from the Thebes scriptorium, the weight of Pharaoh Amenhotep III's proclamation still heavy on your ink-stained fingers. Your kilt's a mess, mud from Katie's marsh, ink from Senefer's lessons and stone dust from Khufu's slab, and you're pretty sure you look like a walking scribal accident. The hum of pens and the pressure of drafting royal decrees fade as you journey north to Alexandria, centuries later, to wander through its lost libraries. After your string of fumbles, think back to that smudged ankh and the drowned fish glyph. You're not sure you're ready for the grandeur of Alexandria's archives, but the scribe's world is pulling you deeper. Picture yourself in Alexandria around 300 BCE, standing before the Great Library, its white marble columns gleaming under a Mediterranean sun. The air smells of sea salt and papyrus, with a hint of olive oil from nearby lamps. This isn't the cramped scriptorium of Thebes. It's a sprawling complex, shelves packed with scrolls from across the known world. Egypt, Greece, Persia. Mainstream history tells us the Library of Alexandria, founded under the Ptolemies, was a hub of knowledge, housing perhaps 500,000 scrolls, many on papyrus crafted like Mary's. You're here to explore its archives, but the scale makes your head spin. One wrong step, and you could knock over a shelf of priceless texts. A librarian scribe named Callimachus, his tunic crisp and his beard neatly trimmed, guides you through the stacks. He's cataloguing scrolls, his reed pen noting, titles in Greek and hieratic. You're handed a scroll to inspect, a medical text on Nile herbs, and you fumble the unrolling, nearly tearing it. Callimachus sighs, muttering about clumsy visitors, and you joke that your hands are cursed by Thoth himself. Here's a quirky tidbit. Librarians like Callimachus sometimes wrote poems on scroll edges to mark their work, a bit of flair in their orderly world. You spot a faint verse about stars guiding scribes, and grin, wondering if it's Callimachus's attempt at immortality. The library's vibe is quieter than the Thebes scriptorium, but it hums with purpose. Scholars whispering, scrolls rustling, pens scratching. You try copying a title onto a clay tablet, mimicking Callimachus's neat script, but your Greek letters look like a drunk sailor's scrawl. He corrects you, his patience thin, and you're reminded of Ptahhotep's grumpy lessons. The scrolls, here, some from Thebes' workshops, hold everything: math, poetry, star charts. You're awed by their range, realizing the papyrus you saw harvested with Keti and crafted with Mary carries the world's knowledge. Historians still argue whether the library was a true archive or a scholar's playground. Some say it was a working library, preserving Egypt's records. Others think it was a prestige project, more about Ptolemaic bragging than practical use. You see both sides. Callimachus's cataloguing is meticulous, like Senefer's grain tallies, but the library's grandeur, marble floors, gold-trimmed shelves, feels like a flex. You're tempted to ask Callimachus if he's read every scroll, but his busy scribbling says he's got no time for your nonsense. It's funny, Alexandria's scribes were so obsessed with organization that they invented the first library catalogues, pinning titles to shelves like ancient post-its. You spot a pin with Homer's Odyssey in Greek and imagine Thutmose, the scribal school kid, dreaming of this place. You try another title, a star chart, and your script's slightly better. Callimachus doesn't scold, a small win. The library's rhythm, write, sort, stack, is soothing, like the temple's chants or the scriptorium's hum, wrapping you in its calm focus. Speaking of focus, your kilt's a canvas of chaos, marsh mud, ink, and now a smudge of Alexandria's dust. You're starting to feel like a scribal hazard, but there's something magical about touching scrolls that hold centuries of thought. You joke to a nearby scholar that your handwriting might crash the library's system, and he chuckles, saying, "It'd take more than your scrawl to ruin this place." The banter keeps you grounded as you follow Callimachus deeper into the stacks, each scroll a link to the scribes you've met: Merit, Anan, Senefer. As you pause by a shelf, the sea breeze, drifting through a high window, you realize these archives are Egypt's memory, built on the papyrus you've followed from marsh to scriptorium. The library's fate, lost to fire or time, looms in your mind. But for now, it's alive. It scrolls whispering stories. You hand the medical text back to Callimachus, careful not to fumble, and step deeper into this lost world, ready to see what else the scribes left behind. You're still in Alexandria's great library, the scent of papyrus and cedar oil clinging to your ever more disastrous kilt. Now layered with Mediterranean dust atop Theban mud and ink. Callimachus's cataloguing drills from the last section echo in your mind, but now you're slipping into a quirkier corner of scribal life. Their superstitions. After your scroll fumbling and drunken Greek letter mishaps, you're hardly the ideal candidate to appease writing gods. But here you are, learning rituals to keep Thoth happy. The air hums with whispered incantations, and you're pretty sure the ibis-headed deity is already judging your smudged glyphs. Picture yourself in a small side chamber of the library, where a scribe priest named Herishef kneels before a tiny ibis statue, lighting a cone of myrrh incense. The walls are painted with blue hieroglyphs, spells to protect scribes from mistakes and bad luck. Mainstream history tells us that by 300 BCE, Egyptian scribes still blended practicality with mysticism, invoking Thoth before important work. You're handed a clay amulet shaped like a writing palette and told to recite a short hymn. You butcher the pronunciation, and Herishef winces like you've insulted his ancestors. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes believed red ink held magical power, so they dot their foreheads with it before drafting treaties. You try it, and the ink trickles into your eyebrow like war paint. Herishef sighs, handing you a cloth. T. Ritual is hypnotic. Chant. Bow. Offer a drop of beer to the ibis statue. And the incense smoke curls into shapes that almost look like hieroglyphs. You're reminded of Anan's tomb spells, where every word held weight and merits quiet, precision in the temple. Herishef explains that some scribes wouldn't write during the unlucky days of the year, fearing their work would anger the gods. You joke that your handwriting might count as a cosmic offense any day, and he doesn't laugh. The library's distant murmur, scholars debating, scrolls unrolling, blends with the chant, lulling you into a trance. Historians still argue whether these rituals were heartfelt or just habit. Some say scribes genuinely feared divine retribution for sloppy work. Others think it was tradition, like knocking on wood. You see both sides. Herishef's devotion feels real, but a younger scribe nearby rolls his eyes and mutters about old men and their ghosts. You're tempted to side with the skeptic, but then you remember your own smudged falcon glyph. Maybe Thoth is punishing you. The chamber's vibe is serene, the blue spells glowing in lamplight. It's funny, Egyptians were so meticulous that they had charms for everything, from crooked lines to ink blots. You spot a spell to steady the hand, and consider stealing it for your next scribal attempt. Herishef catches you eyeing it and presses the amulet into your palm, saying it'll help. You thank him, hoping it works better than your reed pen skills. As you step back into the library's bustle, the amulet warm in your grip, you feel the scribe's world isn't just ink and papyrus. It's faith, fear, and a dash of magic. The sea breeze drifts through the columns, carrying whispers of all the scribes you've met, from Ketty's Marsh to this marble hall. You tuck the amulet into your belt, ready to follow this thread further. You're leaving Alexandria's incense-heavy chambers behind, the Thoth amulet still warm against your hip as you trek toward the Nile's bustling ports. The scribal superstitions from the last section, the chants, the red ink, Herishef's weary sighs, fade into the salty tang of harbour air. Now you're diving into Egypt's papyrus trade, tracking scrolls as they sail to Greece, Rome, and beyond. Your kilt's a lost cause at this point, layered with library dust, temple ink, and now fish scales from the docks, but you're starting to appreciate how these fragile sheets became Egypt's stealthiest export. After your career of smudged glyphs and torn scrolls, you're probably the last person who should handle precious cargo, but here you are, watching sailors barter for papyrus like it's gold. Picture the scene. Alexandria's harbour at dawn, wooden ships bobbing like toys in the turquoise water, their sails patched with colourful dyes. A Phoenician trader named Zachabal unrolls a sample scroll, the same creamy papyrus you saw Mary pound smooth, while a Greek merchant sniffs it like fine wine. Mainstream history tells us that by 300 BCE, Egypt's papyrus monopoly was so powerful that rival kingdoms tried and failed to grow their own reeds. You run a finger along the sheet, remembering Keti's marsh and the back-breaking harvest. Zakabal slaps your hand away, muttering about grubby scholars, and you joke that you've bled for this papyrus, literally, thanks to those sharp reeds. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some traders tested papyrus by holding it to the sun, checking for flaws. You try it, squinting through the sheet, and Zakabal rolls his eyes. Not for reading, idiot, for seeing pinholes. The haggling is fierce. The Greek wants 50 sheets for his olive oil. Zakabal demands 60. You're handed an abacus to calculate the deal, but your fumbling fingers send beads flying. A sailor laughs, saying you'd sink his ship with math like that. The rhythm of trade, argue, weigh, seal with a handshake, is as precise as Senefer's tax records, but louder and smellier. You notice a Roman buyer inspecting a scroll's edge, just like Callimachus taught you in the library, and feel a flicker of pride. Maybe some knowledge stuck. Historians still argue whether papyrus was Egypt's secret weapon or just a pricey commodity. Some say it gave them cultural leverage, control the paper, control the narrative. Others think it was pure profit, like selling sand to deserts. You see both sides. Zakabal boasts that Athenian philosophers beg for Egyptian scrolls, but he also trades papyrus for Sicilian cheese, which feels less lofty. You're reminded of Merit's temple tallies, commerce and devotion always entwined. The dock's vibe is chaotic, but exhilarating. It's funny. Egyptian scribes wrote on this papyrus for pharaohs, while Greeks will scribble philosophy on the same sheets. You spot a child stacking scrolls in cedar boxes, each lined with linen to prevent damp. The care reminds you of Anan's tomb spells, crafted to last millennia. Zakabal tosses you a scrap roll for practice, since you're terrible, and you grin, tucking it with your amulet. As the ship's sails snap taut in the wind, you realize these reeds, once cut in Keti's marsh, will carry words you'll never read to places you'll never see. The thought lingers as you turn back to the city, the harbor's cries fading behind you. The salty tang of Alexandria's harbor still clings to your kilt as you walk away from the shouting merchants and creaking ships. Zakabal's scornful voice still echoes in your ears, grubby scholars. But now you're stepping into a quieter, sadder chapter, the decline of papyrus. The amulet from Hairy Chef presses against your hip as you enter a dim workshop, where a scribe named Papyrus unrolls a strange new material, parchment made from sheepskin. The air smells of tannin and burnt hair instead of fresh papyrus, and your stomach twists. After everything you've seen, Keti's marsh, Mary's pounding mallet, the scriptorium's ink-stained scribes, this feels like betrayal. Mainstream history tells us that by 100 BCE, parchment was gaining ground, especially in Rome and Pergamon, where papyrus was harder to import. Papyrus runs a calloused finger along the sheepskin, showing you how it's scraped thin and stretched. No more worrying about Nile floods, he says, but his voice lacks conviction. You try writing on a scrap, and the nib of your reed pen catches on the surface, leaving a jagged line. Papyrus sighs. You've heard that sound from every scribe you've met, and mutters about stubborn traditionalists. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scribes hated parchment so much they'd secretly soak it to make it feel more like papyrus. You joke that you'd rather wrestle a crocodile than switch, and Papyrus almost smiles. The workshop is quieter than the scriptorium's bustle or the library's murmur. A young apprentice, his hands raw from scraping skins, eyes you with a mix of curiosity and pity. You think of Thutmose, the scribal school kid with his lopsided glyphs, and wonder if he'll end up here, bending to this new trend. Papyrus explains that parchment lasts longer in damp climates, doesn't tear as easily, and, he lowers his voice, doesn't rely on the Nile's whims. You flinch. The Nile's reeds, the heartbeat of everything you've learned, dismissed. In a single sentence, historians still argue whether parchment's rise was inevitable or a cultural tragedy. Some say it was progress, durable, democratic, free from Egypt's monopoly. Others whisper that something irreplaceable was lost when papyrus faded. The smell of the marshes, the rhythm of the mallet, the way ink pooled slightly on the fibrous surface. You see both sides. Pesherenmut's pragmatism versus Senefer's devotion to tradition. You press your thumb into a sheet of parchment, leaving a faint mark, and suddenly miss the give of papyrus beneath your clumsy fingers. The workshops, vibe is resigned, like a family business clinging to life. It's funny how something as simple as a writing surface can carry so much weight. You pocket a scrap of parchment, a relic of this uneasy transition, and step back into the sunlight. The amulet from Herishef feels heavier now, as if mourning what's to come. You're standing at the edge of the Nile once more, the water's familiar murmur a balm after the parchment workshop's tension. The amulet rests in your palm, its edges worn smooth by your thumb. This is where it began, with Katie's reeds, Mary's mallet, Ptahhotep's endless corrections, and now, as the sun dips low, it's where you'll let the story settle. Your kilt is a tapestry of all the places you've been. Marsh mud, temple incense, library dust, harbour salt. You kneel and run a hand through the water, watching the ripples distort your reflection. You look like a scribe now, or at least a scribe's disaster of an apprentice. Papyrus plants sway nearby, their feathery heads bobbing as if whispering to one another. You think of the scrolls they've become, the tax records, the love poems, the spells for the dead, and the hands that shaped them. Senefer's tired eyes, Merit's quiet precision, even Zachabal's trader's smirk. The Nile's current carries a broken reed against your fingers, and you laugh. Somewhere downstream, a new crop is growing. Somewhere upstream, a scribe dips a pen, a mallet pounds, a ship sails. You lie back on the bank, the amulet warm against your chest, and let the water's song lull you. The scribe's world isn't ending. It's just changing, as all things do. The stars emerge, one by one, and you imagine Thoth watching, his ibis head tilted in amusement. You close your eyes. The Nile keeps flowing. The night air is soft now, the Nile's whispers blending with the distant call of a heron. You're drifting, the weight of ink and history dissolving like a drop of black in water. The scribes you've met, stern Ptahhotep, patient Merit, weary Senefer, fade into the shadows, their quills stilled at last. Picture the reeds bending in the breeze, their rustle a lullaby. The marsh where Ketty taught you to cut stalks, the workshop where Mary showed you the rhythm of the mallet, the scriptorium's ink-stained tables, all dissolving into the quiet. Even Alexandria's marble halls, parchment's sharp scent, the trader Zachabal's voice haggling over scrolls. Soft now, softer. You're floating between memory and dream, the amulet a faint weight in your slack hand. The scribe's world was never just papyrus or parchment, ink or chisel. It was the hands, calloused, stained, reverent, that carried words across centuries. You smile, or maybe you just sigh. The stars blur above you. Somewhere, a child practices glyphs on a pottery shard. Somewhere, a reed pen scratches fresh lines into the dark. But here, now, there's only the water's murmur, the scent of lotus, and the gentle, endless hush of time passing. Sleep wraps around you like a well-worn scroll. The last thing you feel is the amulet slipping from your fingers. Back to the river, back to the gods.